Alright, I can't remember how far we got. Stop me when I get to where we don't have notes. Ready? Secular narrative. Did we start this section of the notes yet? Yes?
Yeah.
Again, they claim to be unbiased and neutral, but they're not. And by the time we're done, we're going to unpack it so that you understand that secular humanism is a religion just as Christianity and Islam are. While they claim to be irreligious, they really do believe in the power of humanism. So that's where their belief is. Matter is all that matters. And they have gained credibility and not way more than credibility when it comes to the scientific world, education, media. They've got this, what I've put in an acronym, mega powerful, mega control of the narrative, of the information that is being fed to the American public, and it's either being fed through the education system, the dominant media are secular humanists, government is now filled with secular humanists, and of course entertainment or arts also filled with this kind of thinking. It's hard to escape it. It's hard as a Christian not to allow that kind of thinking to infiltrate your own worldview. I do everything I can to embolden and strengthen my biblical worldview. And then I stand before you trying to help you achieve that same goal. I'm 40 years older than you. It's still hard. I not only try to do it, I teach it outside of the classroom. I try to constantly fill my mind with things that are to help me and have that biblical worldview. It's almost impossible to avoid all of these other ideas that we're constantly being bombarded with. So if you're not careful, you're going to fall victim. You might not think you are. Oh, you don't need it. You're good. I'm good. Okay. Self-deception. And I think we ended here, right? That we do have something in common. While they claim to not be religious, that's not true, but we do have something in common in that both worldviews can't stand the dumbing down, the anti-intellectual popular culture. And I'm not going to get into a debate. I'm not going to say any particular people or genre of entertainment. If you know, you know. It's one of those things that if you have a biblical worldview, or you're a serious secular humanist that puts their full faith in human intellect, well then you can easily pick out the anti-intellectual pop and what's called the dumbing down of America. Now, see if you can easily pick it out in music, movies, art, media. The history of secularism, it's rooted in what you learned last year in civics, most of you, or you learned U.S. history somewhere along the line, that America was founded as a Christian nation. The evidence is overwhelming. However, secularists like to point out, hey, isn't Thomas Jefferson a paragon of the foundation of America? Yes. Oh, look what he said. Look what he believed. And you say America's a Christian nation. Thomas Jefferson, right? And we learned last year that 56 signers, 53 of them, members of the church, many of them ordained ministers. They picked Jefferson and Franklin because they're the two most well known. So in America, the idea of a period of time we're going to talk about in a second called the Enlightenment Jefferson and Franklin being products of that and being leaders in this American Revolution, well then, America isn't a Christian nation. That we're supposedly rooted in this secular kind of thinking. But what they fail to tell you is that Thomas Jefferson and Ben Franklin, while they weren't strong Christians, they didn't believe in God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. They certainly believed, if you read all of their writings, ladies, in the basic tenets of Christianity, and that biblical Christianity was, with all other philosophies out there, the best way to live. The moral principles that you have been brought up with give society the best foundation for success, for peace, success, harmony, unity, the idea that we can all agree that biblical law, biblical truth isn't a harm to anyone. The Ten Commandments, to love God and to love others as you, more than yourself, even. Who would argue that that's not a good way to live? So even these people that they point out that weren't true Christians still believed in the Christian way. And they're products of the Enlightenment. These two words, you should probably already know them if you're 6 months from graduating. Maybe 6 months, seven. Rationalism and empiricism. Rationalism, everything is judged by human reason. And why wouldn't it? Look what we've done. Look what we've done. What a world we've created with our human intellect. Right? Got everything almost on demand. Like literally. Heat on demand. I came in this morning, it was 66 degrees. I pushed a button. It's now, it should be 71 in there. Yep. All I do is push a button. I want to make it cooler, I'll push another button. Empirical truth, something you can prove. If I can't see it, you can't prove it to me visually, audibly, well then, why should I believe? Why should I believe something that I can't experience or empirically test with my five senses? Because matter is all that matters. Elena, you're supposed to believe that you are living in a material world, and you should be a material girl. You don't believe that? Matter's all that matters? I hope not. Why are you smiling? Mm-hmm. Or smirking, I should say. The only knowledge or true rational thoughts we have come through our senses. Christians are to be separated from the real intellectuals. They're going to see you, if you say you're Christian, well, you're just operating on this like faith thing. As if it's blind faith. As if they didn't know you go to Heartland Christian. Oh, you probably didn't learn real stuff. But as if you didn't learn the last 2 years about how rational Christianity is, about how intellectual Christianity actually is, if you've been paying attention. You probably heard of Sir Isaac Newton before, but maybe you never heard of this man named Voltaire. If you have, hopefully you didn't think anything positive about Voltaire. His influence on the way people think is very strong. Playwright, author, philosopher. And what's sad, actually, when it comes to Voltaire, and actually we have to self-reflect and think about how we as Christians, and the church in particular, and especially the church in medieval times and into the Enlightenment period, where we know from world history the church was corrupt. That doesn't mean Christians are wrong. It doesn't mean the Bible's wrong, but the church was corrupt, right? You learned world history that the Roman Catholic Church that was dominating the teachings of Christianity was incredibly corrupt. So it's partly on the threshold of the church to blame for what's happened, because that opened up this idea that people should be seeking other truth. You can prove the church teaching was wrong. Voltaire comes along and tries to wake people up to the fact that this is what they're teaching is not right. And guess what? In some ways he was right. So now we have to play cleanup. Since the Reformation, Christians have basically been on cleanup duty to clean up all the corruption that the Roman Catholic Church brought into the world that gave birth to this kind of thinking that Christians are not intellectual, that Christians don't own the truth, and that we should seek the truth outside of God's authoritative word. Who was this Voltaire guy?
We gotta streamline these ideas. We need Grammarly.
I've got your back.
This is, no one's going to be speaking. It's just music, and you got to read. So he was a French playwright, satirist. You know what satire is? Does everybody know what satire is? It's taking like a truth claim and mocking it, basically, right? Anybody ever heard of like Babylon Bee? You guys avail yourself to social media. It's Ben Shapiro's kind of, it's an offshoot of that, where they take people's ideas and they just make jokes out of them. Did the church at times exercise brutal control? Hello? Can you finish this phrase? Spanish. Starts with an I. Inquisition. Everybody understand what the divine right of kings is? If you don't understand what it is and you hear that phrase, what does that mean, divine right of kings? Come on, somebody interact. What do you think it means? The church taught this doctrine of the divine right of kings. What were they saying?
Like the kings have total power.
Right. Remember that what we learned in world history about the church and how the church and the state kind of became one. And then in dealing with whose authority, they were kind of sharing power, and the church would teach, hey, the king's put there, ordained by God to be there. There is an element of truth to that, isn't there? And therefore, then the king has these divine rights. That the king is better or entitled to have the power that the king has. Therefore, the revolution would have been a sin. Now again, Voltaire's teaching against this. And isn't he kind of right? There is no such thing as the divine right of kings. So as you're reading that, do you understand what I'm saying? That a man like Voltaire, who became so influential to the rest of Europe from the central place he was in France, where the church was so powerful and corrupt, that his message is going to resonate because what he is saying, much of it is true. So it wasn't that we need to reform the church like the Reformation achieved. His idea was, no, we need to just break society that the church has any authority in their lives at all. And that kind of thinking has dominated our culture, Western civilization, since. I like that phrase, thinking Christians. See if that makes sense to you. Voltaire's arguments against core Christian doctrines influenced another kind of revolution within Christianity. That some core Christian doctrines are expendable. They're stumbling blocks to the teachings of Christ. Questions, comments? Why do we show you that? To help you understand the incredible strength of the anti-Christian sentiment within the intellectual realm. And if you're not ready for it, you will be devoured by it. But wait, there's more. Go ahead and hit that last light, please, there, Miss Rachel. As you're happily done with notes.
The question really answered by the Christian worldview is God's story, as told in the Bible, the actual story of the world? The secular humanist worldview asks the question, is God even relevant to life? So let's say God does exist. Does it even matter? So in order to grasp that, try to understand it, we have to figure out what the secular worldview is and what it actually teaches. There actually is a clip that can do this in about 5 seconds for us, so this might be the shortest lecture you have ever heard. Coming from Horton Hears a Who, the philosophy of secular humanism was best represented in one very brief statement.
Well, I say it, you can't see it, hear it, or feel it, it doesn't exist.
All right, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. That is our lecture on secular humanism. Just teasing. Yeah, you know you're not going to get away that easy. The philosophy of secular humanism is seen in a lot of different areas, and we'll talk about the actual content of it. But you see it in films like Horton Hears a Who, where the lady says that Horton is not actually hearing things from Smallville, that actually, it was Smallville, wasn't it? Smallville. Whatever it is. William Ernest Henley actually is sort of the philosophical statement generator through this poem called Invictus. You probably have heard this poem before. But he says, out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody, but bowed. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul.
You may have heard those last two lines.
It was a very popular poem up until the 1990s, when a man named Timothy McVeigh Timothy McVeigh drove a moving truck loaded with explosives in front of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building in Oklahoma City and blew that truck up as a bomb. 171 people, including 3 unborn children, died in that explosion. Several years later, Timothy McVeigh, having been convicted by a jury of having committed these murders, was sentenced to death. And when he was asked for his final statement, he simply handed the prison warden a piece of paper. Unfolded, the piece of paper was the poem Invictus. So in other words, not even taking away my body can stop me from ruling over you. So now when people hear the poem Invictus, it kind of sends chills up their spine for those who understand a little of the story of Timothy McVeigh, this American terrorist. But a lot of people today still will embrace secular humanism as the default position. They will say, look, if you say Christianity is true, then you're making a claim. I'm making no claims at all. Just what exists, exists. That's the way it is. There is no supernatural explanation for it. In fact, people will even take pains to try to look at scientific ideas to demonstrate what they say to be true. In fact, there was actually some brain research that was done on some Tibetan monks and some Catholic nuns, and they found that when those people were involved in meditation, the parietal lobe of the brain right there, the part of the brain that's sensitive to space and time, goes dim. And they said, see, the brain creates the idea of God. This research was so popular that Time magazine actually did a cover article on it a number of years ago. But even Time magazine, at the very end of the article, made an insightful observation. It said at the end of the day, what can never be proven by research is whether the brain creates God or God created the brain. In the end, Time magazine said, it is a matter of faith. It's a matter of faith. Recognizing that even secular humanists are religious people who have faith. One of them, Jacques Berliner-Blanc, is a professor at Georgetown University, professor of law, and he says, the secularists are here and now people. They live for this world, not the next. What he's not telling you is they don't believe that there is a next world, or they believe that whatever the content is of that next world, whatever the content is of God's nature and character, that's irrelevant to how we live our lives today. Still, this is interesting. Secularists come up with a story of the world to justify their beliefs. When I took various history courses and social science courses at the university, I learned this story. It was never put in one simple paragraph like I'm going to read it to you, but every single supposed fact in the story was given to me as a fact of history when I was at the university. And here's how the secular story of the world goes.
So, when I said that we have scant little in common with secularism, what you're about to read on the screen is totally opposite of the truth. But this is somebody put in paragraph form what secularism teaches, and you might not get it just like this so bluntly, but if you spend your time in public education or around places in media and government that believe in secular humanism, this is basically the story they tell, and it's totally opposite of the Christian truth that you know.
The followers of Jesus were evil liars whose goal was to establish a macho anti-woman cult. The good people of Rome tried to stop them, but the wicked Emperor Constantine managed to establish Christianity as Rome's official religion anyway. Once in power, Christians intentionally undermined Rome's strength, and this once great civilization collapsed. The church blindly pressed forward in its obsession with control, plunging Europe into the Dark Ages. It took a few hundred years, but Europe was eventually rescued by scientists and philosophers who bravely risked their lives to challenge the church's teaching that the earth was flat and the center of the universe. Occasionally, Christians gained power long enough to burn tens of thousands of witches, massacre millions of natives, and launch cruel crusades against innocent civilized Muslims. Fortunately, due to the brilliance of those who rejected the church's teachings, the Enlightenment saw the triumph of science and reason over religion. However, we must not let down our guard, because greedy, ignorant Christians resent the progress made by clever, reasonable secularists, and they will do everything they can to manipulate their way into power to prevent decent folk from having a good time and living their lives in freedom.
Now, you know, as thinking Christians, that there's elements of truth to that, again, because we know how corrupt the church was. But you also know, as thinking Christians, that that's not biblical truth. And that Christians who are supposedly greedy, ignorant, and resent progress, do not do everything they can to manipulate and seek power to prevent people from having a good time and living their lives in freedom. The church, as an institution, we know was corrupt. So another thing to steel yourself about is when the supposed intellectual crowd wants to put you down as being anti-intellectual, and you're a Christian, therefore you support what the church taught. Like I said, much of what Voltaire and what you just read, the blame is on the quote-unquote institution we call the church, but it's not on the Bible. The blame is not on Christians. The blame is on the institution that was the Roman Catholic Church. Do you understand that? You have to be ready for, in your own mind and heart, for that attack, because you know the truth. That's not what the Bible teaches. The church was not teaching Christianity. The church was teaching their own self-serving ideas that allowed them to be in power. You learn that. So they take something that is partially true, and this is how it always works. This is how Satan always works. Takes things that you can easily be convinced that are true, and then extrapolates that then to, well, then that disqualifies everything else that your supposed side of the argument or debate or your stance for truth is disqualified now, because what you say you believe in Christianity, the people that were empowered in the church corrupted it, so therefore you're disqualified. But that's really what they think. That's the history of the world. And everything, like we put, I think it was in these notes, that everything good that has come from quote-unquote Western civilization has been brought to us by the non-Christian people, the irreligious, and everything bad by these people that we call Christians. So lest you be blindsided when you go to the next level and you're sitting in some college class, especially if it's not a Christian school, or Christian in name only, because these things, for a lot of this teaching gets done in schools that are supposedly Christian as well.
And thus ends the history of the world. And that's the story that is told. Every single supposed fact in that was given to me in one form or another during my university education. Here's the tricky part. There isn't one single fact in that entire statement. If you break it down and look at every single supposed fact in that statement, they all begin to come apart. And you can find a lot of information in this. One source on this is a guy named Alvin Schmidt, who's a history professor, who wrote about the story of Christianity. Another one is a guy named Rodney Stark, no relation to Tony that I know of. But Rodney Stark is a professor who has written books, and these are published by major publishing companies. This is not like fringe material. Major books, major releases, major publishing companies, showing how this story of history simply isn't so. And yet, if it is true, then it justifies a certain way of living. In fact, it justifies a certain treatment of Christianity. So people who say we're going to live and let live very often are the people who are least likely to let you live and let live. Do you understand what I'm saying? Because they believe you need to conform to certain standards of what they believe the story of history requires us to do. In fact, you start to see the religious content of some of these ideas come into play. This was an interesting blog written by somebody who is the roommate of a girlfriend of a Summit graduate. She went to a concert by Macklemore at Augustana College in South Dakota, and she said in her little article, Augustana's gym was filled with 5,000 people, including her cowboy boyfriend, she said. It was brimming with excitement and adrenaline, but when Macklemore started to play Same Love, which is about the legitimacy of same-sex relationships, she says the place about collapsed. And then she actually goes on to say this: during the song, almost every person at the concert had their hands up and their eyes closed. It reminded me of church.
Should I know Macklemore? I know the name. Is he popular anymore? Anybody? He was? Like 10 years ago, probably? 8 years ago? They had their hands up and their eyes closed, as if they were at church. Because they are a religious belief system. What's that? You met Jeff Myers for real? Wait, who won last night? I was too busy watching Taiwan. There was a one roll I almost got out. You put your goal. No. Seriously? You have to retrace your steps. Oh, I'm not starting wheels again. I'm not starting wheels again.